Hello and welcome to the DDS Rate Studies webinar. In this webinar, we will be detailing how to complete the DDS Provider Survey. The survey's purpose is to collect information about the way vendors spend money providing services to people with disabilities. In 2016, our legislature approved rate increases for DDS vendors. As a condition for receiving these rate increases, the legislature directed DDS to conduct a rate study. DDS retained the consulting firm Burns & Associates to conduct the study. The study will collect financial information from vendors, analyze the information received, and suggest an effective rate-setting method to DDS. In May of 2018, Burns & Associates sent out a provider survey to DDS vendors requesting their financial information. The survey format is in Excel with over 100 tabs. While this seems daunting, each provider will only have to fill out 5 general information tabs and 2 tabs for each of their service codes. If you have 1 service code, you'll only have to fill out a total of 7 tabs. The financial information you report should be from your last fiscal year or calendar year. Information should be taken from your financial statements or tax return. The information you provide on the survey will be confidential. Vendors will not be audited, and individual vendor information will not be provided to DDS. Let's get started. The first tab in the provider survey is the checklist. Green check marks mean you have completed the tab. Red boxes mean you have not completed the tab. The service codes tabs default to green. After completing the survey, vendors should review the submission checklist and ensure all the arrows are green. The TOC tab stands for Table of Contents. It lists the tabs we have to complete depending on your service code. For instance, if your service code is 862 in-home respite, you will have to complete 5 general tabs as well as the 862 staff tab and the 862 other tab. We'll go over each of these tabs in detail. The Contact and Revenue tab is for reporting basic company information and revenue. Enter the name of your agency, your FEIN, and your vendor IDs. Enter contact information for your agency's contact person. There are 5 lines related to revenue. Line 11, DDS program revenues, will automatically populate. Line 12, federal benefit payments, is used to enter any SSI or SSDI payments received from your regional center and for your regional center clients. That means if you receive SSI for a non-regional center client, you would not include that revenue here. If you don't receive any of these payments, ignore it. Line 13 is for your fundraising and investment income. If you receive donations for disability services from outside sources, list those here. List any other additional sources of revenue on line 14. For example, revenue related to services provided outside of regional centers should be listed here. Other forms of revenue such as rental revenue should be included here as well. The DDS Revenue tab is a tab you will use to report your DDS revenue. DDS revenue is your regional center revenue. If you are paid by the regional center for ILS, respite, or supported living services, you will need to enter that here, next to the appropriate service code. Report all the revenue you receive in your last fiscal year. You can use your financial statements, tax return, or e-bill statements. For instance, we have a sample profit and loss for an agency. I can use the revenue amounts from the last fiscal year or calendar year and report those next to the appropriate service code. I can also use my tax return or e-bill statements. For instance, I can gather my invoice history detail, and I can gather for all 12 months and total the amounts per service code. If you receive revenue related to multiple service codes, separate the revenue by service code and report it on the proper row. Revenue for respite will need to be broken out by employer of record or agency model. Agency model is for the revenue you receive for clients that you staff by employees you recruit. EOR clients and their support circles recruit and schedule their own workers. Revenue for supported living will need to be broken out by in-home clients right here. In-home clients will need to be divided into intermittent and continuous. Intermittent care includes breaks in service. Continuous care is provided without breaks. Residents that live in clustered residences will be reported on line 77. On line 86, enter all other DDS revenue. This will include revenue you received for other service codes not included on the survey. For instance, if you received revenue for service code 20, you would enter that revenue here. Please note that some SSI or SSDI payments are paid through the regional center. This revenue should not be reported here, but rather on line 12 of the Contact and Revenue tab. This tab reports your admin staff. The survey separates your office staff into administrative and program support. We're going to take a moment to talk about this distinction. Any person in your organization that spends any time on administrative tasks should be listed here. Administrative tasks are anything that is not directly tied to operating your program or delivering services. Administrative functions include tasks such as financial reporting, overseeing the maintenance and function of technical support, HR tasks related to admin staff. There might be office staff that spend 100% of their time on supporting direct care workers or other program support. These are program support office staff and should not be reported here. For instance, office staff might be dedicated to resolving service issues, scheduling, or answering client questions. These employees should not be reported here. Rather, they should be reported with direct care staff under the Service Code tab, which we'll review later. List the titles of all the admin staff and the number of employees with that title. Multiple employees can be listed per line so long as they all have the same title. For instance, you can list 6 accountants on one line and group their wages. For each position, enter the total wages, taxes, and benefits paid. Benefits include health insurance, retirement, etc. Taxes include Social Security, Medicare, and state and federal unemployment insurance. You might want to set up a spreadsheet that calculates the taxes and benefits. For instance, you could use a spreadsheet like this. You can list each staff person, their position, and their wages. You can calculate their Social Security by multiplying their wages by 6.5%. You can calculate their Medicare by multiplying their wages by 1.45%. Their FUTA can be calculated by multiplying 7,000 by 2.7%. You calculate their SUI by multiplying your SUI rate by 7,000. List the retirement benefits and health benefits you provide each year. Total these up, and you can report them directly on the survey. Once you've calculated your wages and your taxes, you'll need to allocate your employees' time. Allocate their time across the 4 categories: DDS programs, fundraising, other programs, and non-admin. DDS programs are your regional center programs. Fundraising and investments is for the time spent raising money from donors. Other program admin is for the time it takes to administer programs not funded by RCED and DDS. Non-admin tasks are for time spent on program operations or filling in for direct care staff. If you have to cover a shift for a direct care staff member, that would be non-admin time. Time you take to train your direct care staff would be non-admin time as well. It's perfectly fine to use estimates. The Admin Prog Ops Other tab allows you to report your admin and program operations expenses outside of wages. Administrative expenses are not directly linked with running your program. They are expenses for office supplies, bank service charges, marketing, and utilities. Program operation expenses are for expenses directly related to supporting your program. These expenses include training for direct care staff, background checks for prospective employees, and office space for program operations staff. You will enter total admin costs for each line, allocating them between DDS services, fundraising, other services, and program ops. Allocate expenses to DDS services for administrative expenses related to carrying out your DDS programs. These expenses will be general, like your office supplies and bank charges. Under Program Ops, you will enter all your service codes that are included in the survey. For instance, if you're a respite agency, enter your service code here. Allocate expenses related to the program operations to each of these service codes. These expenses will be program specific, such as background checks and training. It's fine to estimate percentages. Any expenses related to fundraising should be allocated to fundraising. For expenses related to non-DDS services, allocate them to other services. The expense categories given are general, and you are free to regroup them as you see fit. The survey instructions give the example of grouped utilities and rent. If you separate your utilities from your rent, that's fine, but if you group them, you're allowed to group them and include them in rent. You don't have to separate them for the purposes of the survey. Use the general categories in your financial statements or tax return and enter them in column D. For instance, if we used our agency's profit and loss, I would drop my expenses here and allocate them across the columns as appropriate. The expense categories are self-explanatory for the most part. However, it's important to exclude staff wages and benefits from this page. For instance, when listing hiring expenses, do not include the cost for your HR staff. That should be reported on the admin staff page. Report benefits for your direct care staff and program operations staff here. Program operations staff is staff devoted to providing program services or supporting direct care staff through training, phone support, advice, supervision, and quality control. Information is to be provided separately for full-time and part-time staff. Full-time is defined as staff that works 30 or more hours per week. This page should report current staff, not staff employed during your prior fiscal year. Holiday pay. Holiday pay is defined as two different kinds of payment. Paid time off for holidays is the first. For instance, if you give your employees New Year's Day off and paid them for the day, this would be considered holiday pay. The second kind of holiday pay is compensatory time given for holidays. For instance, if your employee works on a holiday and you give them vacation hours for working, the cost of the vacation hours would be considered holiday pay. Report the waiting period to receive holiday pay and the minimum hours needed to work each week in order to be eligible. On line 6, report the staff currently eligible to receive holiday pay. Lastly, on line 7, report the average number of holidays that direct care and program operations staff receive. PTO. For the purposes of this section, treat PTO, vacation, and sick time as the same. If you have different eligibility requirements for PTO, vacation, or sick time, report the least stringent requirements. For instance, if you have a 90-day waiting period to be eligible for PTO, but no waiting period for sick time, report no waiting period. Enter the eligibility requirements for staff on lines 8 through 10. And enter the staff eligible for PTO on line 11. On line 12, enter the average annual PTO and sick leave days the direct care and program operations staff receive. Include the California sick leave employees receive, as well as any local sick leave employees receive on line 12. Health insurance. In this section, you will enter your eligibility requirements and cost information related to the health care for your staff. On lines 13 through 15, enter your firm's eligibility requirements. On line 16, enter the staff currently eligible to receive insurance. On line 17, enter the staff actually receiving health insurance. And lines 18 through 19 are related to the cost of providing health insurance. Other benefits. If you offer other benefits for your employees, such as retirement benefits, enter your eligibility requirements and costs for these employees. At the very bottom, you'll want to enter your state unemployment insurance rate. You should use the rate for 2018. Now we'll review a sample staff tab. The staff tabs are all the same no matter service code. We'll use 862 in our example. you'll need to scroll all the way down to the 862 Staff tab. The Staff tab is to report your payroll information for direct care staff and program operations staff. You should group employees by job title and by county. For instance, if my respite workers worked 100 hours in Alameda County, I would report one line item, respite worker, Alameda County. I'll scroll over so we can see the job titles. Respite aid, Alameda, 100 hours. If I have respite workers that worked 100 hours in Alameda County and 200 in Butte, I would report them on separate lines. You'll need to identify each employee or contractor as such. You will need to use a payroll report to complete this form. Your payroll report should list hours and wages. A sample payroll report might look something like this. It should have total overtime hours paid, and it should have these amounts separated because overtime is paid at a higher wage. To arrive at your overtime percentage, you will divide your overtime hours, such as here, by the total hours worked for whichever group of employees you're looking at. You'll enter that overtime percentage here. Next, you'll enter your total wages in column G, and then your average hourly wage will automatically populate. You'll need to calculate your annual turnover. Determine the number of employees that left your firm in the last fiscal year that needed replacement. An acceptable estimate would be the number of employees terminated if every terminated employee was replaced. Divide the number of employees that left by your total number of employees. Under staff training, report the hours of training per category. Report the average number of hours your staff should receive in the first year and subsequent years. Report what they should be receiving, not necessarily what they are receiving. For instance, if you should be providing 6 hours of crisis prevention training but cannot due to insufficient rates, include the 6 hours of training you should be providing. Training includes all training, orientation, CPR, etc. Allocate the staff time across the job function. If staff fills multiple roles, allocate their roles across the categories. Divide your staff time between agency and respite and other services. Estimates are fine for this. For instance, if you estimate your respite workers spend 50% of their time on agency respite, 20% of their time on EOR respite, and 25% of their time on another service code, you would report those percentages in columns S through U respectively. Other request information regarding your clients and staff. Report information separately for agency and EOR. EOR clients are staffed by the client's guardians, whereas agency clients are staff that you recruit the workers for, schedule, and supervise. Refer to your e-bill reports to see how many hours under each service you provide if you do not have another way of obtaining that information. Report the number of clients, average service hours per year, average service counters per week per staff, and average service encounter length. Estimates can be used. Average number of hours of service per year can be retrieved from the billed hours and divided by the number of clients. Some payroll modules include the number of shifts worked in length, and you can get your service encounter there. If not, analyze 1 week of information, or just even leave it blank. It's better to complete part of the survey than none at all. Enter staffing for a typical week. You can take the total for each line item for the year and divide by 52. So you can take total hours worked at your agency, divide it by 52, and report it here. Otherwise, you can select a particular week and report information for just that week. You should report what a typical staffing pattern should look like to comply with state law. not necessarily what you can staff. For instance, if you have to forgo some record keeping due to staffing constraints, we don't want to report the amount of time you spend record keeping now. We want to report the time you should be spending on record keeping. Report the time on billable services, planning meetings, etc. Report or estimate your miles driven between clients' homes. Report your workers' comp rate. Here. If you don't know your workers' comp rate, divide the amount you spent on workers' comp for the year by the total wages paid for the period. Report on-site staff supervision per staff per year. The survey wants this on an annual basis. A quick estimate would be to take the hours worked by supervisors and divide it by the number of employees you have. Yet, if rates have caused a reduction in supervision, put what supervision should be in your agency for quality services, not the hours you are currently supervising. The next service code we're going to look at is 896. Scroll down. Now, 896 staff is the same as 862, so we're going to ignore this tab. 896 other is for services delivered in individuals' homes. We're going to report services by intermittent and continuous. Intermittent clients do not need continual care from your agency. The 896 Other tab is similar to the 862 Staffing tab. There is an additional section for activities outside the home and staffing. Activities outside the home is for reporting the number of continuous clients that participate in activities outside the home. You can arrive at the average by analyzing a few clients and averaging those clients. For instance, if you have 3 clients that altogether spend 30 hours a week outside the home, report 10 hours per week as their average. The staffing section requests information about overnight shifts, food and recreational activities. The survey also requests information regarding the IHSS services clients receive. If gathering the requested information for all your clients isn't feasible, analyze a few clients and average the number for those clients. The 896 Other CR tab is for services delivered in clustered residential settings. Information will need to be broken out by site. The clustered residential tab is similar to the 896 Home tab, except for requiring vehicle information. They ask for the number of vehicles per site, the miles driven, etc. They ask for the average purchase price of vehicles. Often providers' vehicles are older and would be much more expensive to replace today than the original purchase price. Therefore, use the replacement cost of the vehicle today. All the tabs related to Service Code 635, Independent Living, is very similar to Code 862 and 869's tabs. Please refer to the methods listed above for reporting. This concludes our webinar.